TV News political commentator and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is joining me now with more. Tom, good morning to you. So what are you expecting from that meeting today between Mark Carney and coastal First Nations?
Well, I think that Mark Carney has to repair some of the damage done when Tim Hodgson, his very capable energy minister, simply said to those First Nations, well, they could have had a meeting by Zoom. That was seen as somewhat arrogant for nations that across Canada, and in BC, of course, have gone through hundreds of years of colonialism and racism, and to be told that they don't actually get an in-person meeting, Zoom would have been fine, wasn't seen as being appropriate, and I think that they were right. With regard to these big energy projects, Carney has something big to offer. He's saying, look, be part of the action, get part of the investments here and get some of the returns on those investments. That'll be good for your First Nations. All you have to do is look at the James Bay Cree. On the Quebec side, they're part of that huge project that dammed some of the rivers and provided huge revenues for Hydro-Quebec. They've been benefiting from that. Very modern villages and infrastructures. Doesn't mean the problems go away, but compared to the Ontario side, it's unbelievably different. So in BC, the pitch from Carney is going to be, you can be part of these big projects. There will be a lot of revenue generated. And indeed, with regard to some of the LNG projects, most of the First Nations have signed on. Now, you require prior informed consent. Those are the words from the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Right now, those coastal First Nations are saying it's not on to bring large tankers onto that coast. It's just too dangerous. And on that, they're right. That's why Canada banned them. So the thought of a second pipeline is something that is entirely possible. You'd have to go through the normal process, but it's one thing to say that you're going to shorten the environmental review process. It's quite another to say that you're going to try to get around the treaty rights. There are fewer treaties in BC than other parts of Canada, but there are treaties in some cases, the treaty rights, the inherent rights, and the constitutional rights of First Nations. They're worried about what this means with Bill C-5 that says, we're going to push these big projects through. And I'll give you a specific example, Marcia. When they're trying to sell this to Canadians, the Liberals have put together, and they're paying for them with taxpayers' money, to toot their own horn, to say, this is great. Remember the St. Lawrence Seaway. Well, guess what? Ask the Mohawk community of Ganawagi what they remember about the building of the St. Lawrence Seaway. That wasn't in the 1850s. That was in the 1950s. And they lost hundreds and hundreds of acres of their land, and they lost access to the waterway that was part of their history. It was ancestral. Those were their rights, simply taken away. So stop boasting about what a great project the St. Lawrence Seaway was, because it shows that you're blind to what happened to the First Nations there. That's what they're worried about. This is the idea that, there's an emergency, we push everything aside, we start spending public money for political advertising for the Liberals, which is what they're doing. They got rid of the tougher rules that Trudeau had put in to keep that honest. And now they're trying to say, no, you have to move aside. Every big company has understood one thing in recent years, that you can't take shortcuts around First Nations rights. That's why they respect them. They know that the final arbiter will be the courts. Yeah. So putting something in place that doesn't respect that could get turned down by the courts in 10 years. That's why they've got to start showing the type of respect they're showing today by having the Prime Minister himself show up for a meeting and to start talking about these issues in detail.
Tom, can we just quickly pivot to what's next for the Prime Minister after he leaves BC? What are you watching for to come out of his visit to China?
Canola on our end, electric vehicles on the Chinese end. We went along with the Americans. We didn't have any analysis ourselves that could prove that there was dumping or government involvement, but the Americans said, we don't want Chinese electric vehicles, 100% tariff. We went along with it. It got us nothing in return from the Americans, except more grief and more tariffs on us. So I think at some point we've got to stop being naive. Why should Canadians continue to pay 50% more for an electric vehicle than they could for a Chinese electric vehicle? Doug Ford is saying, well, if they want to come in, let them invest here. That's a smart idea. And I think that Carney and Hodgson and others around him are going to say, yeah, let's see what we can get out of this. But I think that the idea of removing those tariffs would allow us to have our canola farmers and others sell their products without the tariffs that were retribution. It was a reaction by the Chinese to something that we did. And so if we want to get it removed, then we've got to start acting on both fronts at the same time. Yeah. Right now, Canadians are paying to subsidize, to give back some of the money lost by those farmers. Why would we'd be using taxpayers' money to correct something that we should never have done in the first place, because we had no evidence of dumping. We certainly never published any evidence of it, other than to say, oh, we're going along with the Americans. So I think that that's part of the background.
Yeah.
Stop being subservient to the Americans and in lockstep with them necessarily. Doesn't mean we're going to be picking fights, but at some point we've got to stop being naive. They're going after us. Let's start taking care of our own interests.
Yeah. Tom, we'll leave it there for this morning. We'll check in with you later this week as the Prime